Frames, lines, traces make the visual language of abstraction. Their widths and angles, their depths and spreads are designs of classification and interpretation. Squared, punctuated, uninterrupted, curved, they compose a synthesized grammar which extends the economy of knowledge production. They capture, inform, measure, building the epistemes of tomorrow. But who is the creator of these abstracted forms that circulate our regimes of understanding? And what makes their meanings refer univocally? When representation avers not a practice of mirroring, but one of constructing, inherently enacting ontological gaps and hierarchies, what areas of our composing reality become overwritten? The urgency that foregrounds the answers to these questions entails a geopolitical consideration, particularly when reality is formulated in cartographic terms, and all the more since the new climatic conditions mark as necessary a change of perspective in identifying the Earth with the world. Edouard Glissant, in his book Poetics of Relation, proposes a rearticulation of the abstract imaginary through its intimate, hyphenated delineation into space. Thinking thought usually amounts to withdrawing into a dimensional space, in which the idea of thought alone persists, but thought in reality spaces itself out into the world. It informs the imaginary of peoples, their varied poetics, which it then transforms, meaning in them its risk becomes realized. What deeply interests me here is the potentiality of thought to be formulated with, along, across, into, against the still vigorous adimensionality maintained active by the heritage of modern essentialism and its obsession with form, with line. Together with its collapse into space, thought also collapses into corporeality. It roots and stretches, widens, grows limbs and feelers, infiltrating the organization of the world as a body. The prevailing of representationalism, which reclaims a sort of sanitization of the epistemes in accordance with the hegemonies of knowledge production, but at distance from the matters of practice, is transformed so that it can reach materialization. Practices of knowing and being are not isolable. They are mutually implicated. We don't obtain knowledge by standing outside the world. We know because we are the world. We are part of the world in its differential becoming. The separation of epistemology from ontology is a reverberation of a metaphysics that assumes an inherent difference between human and non-human, subject and object, mind and body, matter and discourse. Karen Bayer. Thought in reality spaces itself out into the world, shades away the division between representations and represented matters in shaping reality. That is, between epistemologies of form and ontologically entangled entities which await representation. The gap dissolves once the concept of space renders possible the regrounding of the abstract imaginary into the materiality of the world. A realism without representationalism permeates to obviate the social constructivist dimension which granted the sovereignty of words and legitimated the colonial project. Glissant's reading of thought, and together with thought that of reason and language, in terms of speciality, restoring it, the triad, thought, reason, language, not only to the very nature of its geographical corporality, but also to its extensively moving and morphing, always performative metabolism. dismantles the asymmetrical faith in our access to representation over things. Words don't pre-exist things. Epistemology doesn't pre-exist ontology. The Cartesian habit of the mind, which separated the two and raced to become the modern doxa, is a contingent fact of history and not a logical necessity. But which history manipulated logics into facts? The insurgent woman recites her knowledge to luminous trees, and the luminous trees mutter and rustle and tell. This language that sizes you is not from you, dig for your own words. And the voiceless people say, we have no utterance beyond this shoreless river where mires rise. They swell, while mud wraps and shelters and cover us. Who speaks to us of digging? Land, body, territory are the dangerous words of the modern vocabulary, and each refers back to the most dangerous of all, which is nature. Labeled as a specter of biology, a repository for essentialism, a ground for evolutionary determinism, the darkest basement of objection, nature was also used as the main engine to make operational the planetary management of capitalism and colonialism pairing. The colonizing mission, the colonial colonizing mission, was the euphemistic mask of brutal access to people's bodies, lands, and territories, to unimaginable exploitation and systemic terror. A change in nature as a change in identity. Nature became morbid, dreadful, repulsive, hidden to the eye. But to see today is to see the powerful reduction of human beings to animal, to inferiors by nature, in a schizoid understanding of reality that dichotomizes the human from nature, the human from non-human, and thus imposes an ontology and a cosmology that in its power and constitution disallows all humanity. This is a quote from Maria Alcones, who is one of the pioneers in de-colonial feminism. Less than human beings we were, says the insurgent woman, and our lands were less than lands, and our territories were less than territories, because they were primordial topoi of nature. Yet, our bodies germinated and sprouted as seeds into moisture, as raw into worms. Vanessa Watts tells us the story of how Donosony, a cosmology. According to how Donosony cosmology, Sky Woman fell from a hole in the sky. On her descent, Sky Woman fell through the clouds and the air towards water below. During her descent, birds could see this falling creature and saw she could not fly. They came to her and helped to lower her slowly to waters beneath her. The birds told Turtle that she must need a place to land, as she possessed no water legs. Turtle rose up, breaking to the surface, so that Sky Woman could land on Turtle's back. Once landed, Sky Woman and Turtle began to form the earth, the land becoming an extension of their bodies. What stands here in this historical account of the people of the Longhouses, the transliteration of the Haudenosaunee name as massively important for undermining, confusing, and troubling the ontological epistemological cut of the Western Eurocentric imaginaries, is a theoretical understanding of the world via physical embodiment. A physical embodiment which does not calculate only the human performativity, but the intersections of plant and animal creatures, both above and underneath the waters. The presence of non-human agency in what constitutes a society is a belief that extends from the place thought of the world. Place thought is a non-distinctive space where place and thought were never separated, because they never could or can be separated. Place thought is based upon the premise that land is alive and thinking, and that humans and non-humans derive agency through the extensions of these thoughts. The animate nature of the land goes beyond the concept of vitality, which is one of the primordial milestone recuperations of the new-materialist thinking. The animate nature means both being alive and acting, being full of desire and will and thought. And thought designates not an abstract articulation of the world, but an effective embodied one, based on the multiple extensions of agency. As much as white mythologization struggled to transform indigenous cosmologies into myths, the place thought still persists as an identity structure in delineating the society organization of these lands. In order to make itself function, operational, colonialism converted the division between scientific discourse and storytelling into a hierarchical dualism, maintaining the scientific discourse as the appanage of knowledge production. But what constitutes society from the perspective of indigenous populations resolves around the power of storytelling to intersect more than human worlds, rather than solely interactions among human beings. And the insurgent woman gathered the mud around her feet and said, "This is my land, my body, my territory. From it I shall root and blossom and spread. My thoughts will be scattered into 7 seas, and 7 skies will carry my words in transparent shadows." A body deprived of its land is half a body. A land deprived of its territory is half a land. A territory deprived of its bodies is half a territory. If you can't cope with the ants, don't mess with the anthills. So goes the slogan chanted in by the activist in Camila Freita's documenting film Landless. The activist occupying land belonging to a sugarcane processing plant in the northeastern Brazilian town of Santa Helena, one branch of the landless workers movement that has been battling for land access for smallholder farmers in the country since 1984. The cause is unimpeachable, and even more pressing with Bolsonaro's current backing for ruthless agribusiness, whose giant footprint excludes almost everyone else. Another form of rebellion, this time a peaceful rebellion, was the Chipko movement in India, which fought against deforestation. And it originated in 1973. Deforestation had led to landslides and floods and to the scarcity of water, fodder and fuel. And women were the ones that provided these basic needs. And for them, scarcity meant longer walks for collecting water and firewood, and a heavier burden to bear. Chipko women with Vandana Shiva and Gaura Devi as community leaders knew that the real value of the Himalayan forests due to their reproduction labor that they did. The folk songs of that period said, "These beautiful oaks and rhododendrons, they give us cool water, don't cut these trees, we have to keep them alive." A material thinking is needed to fight the deep cuts of colonial straight line and to reevaluate bodies, lands and territories as nouns that can be verbed to act and activate, to respond and rebel. They are material semiotic actors which co-emerge as agents of knowledge production and generative nodes in composing a relational ecology of our present world. The agency of nature is central for refiguring a politics of praxis through which the mechanism of abstraction thinking can be grounded into the very flesh of the things it aims to adimensionalize. If space itself is transcorporeal, to use the concept of Stacey Alaimo, that is a space which attests the implication of human bodies not only with each other, but with non-human creatures and physical landscapes, the thought that spaces itself out into the world cannot be otherwise than transcorporeal, an entanglement of material fleshiness. The colonial line marked the situation of the human in complete exteriority of nature, a divide that must be ethically acknowledged, critically questioned, and materially erased, especially in the current climate change context, which is constantly saturated by neoliberal progress narratives of controlling the future, or by the sustainability narratives of saving the past. Both of these discourses largely obfuscate our mere implications. A new theoretical site needs to be imagined in order for a robust materialization of all bodies to be actualized while taking into account the fullness of matter's implication in its ongoing historicity and worlding. These days, whatever you have to say, leave the roots on. Let them dangle in the dirt just to make clear where they come from. Thank you.